I want to talk about some of the landing stuff. I have 3 different drills that are printed out that I can send to you guys. Some of you have already received these drills. I've asked for them from one of my other discussions that I had. I'm going to perform these drills today for you so that you have a visual reference, and you can always come back to this this video and supplement that with the written description of how to do the drills that I have for you. Bunting, again, is a terrific one. Aside from the disconnection of your consciousness is what I call that. When I'm doing that drill, you'll notice, I'll put it up one more time, I put the bat behind my back, behind my field of vision. So it's not in front of me, so I'm not like paying attention to something that's out here and trying to coordinate it. I'm actually keeping it outside of my field of vision behind me and allowing my eyes to just direct me. So that's how you'd want to do that drill if you did it. Bunting is very much the same thing. It's presetting some directions. I'm not big on bunting. I train hitters to bunt because they get called upon to bunt. Some of my really good hitters, I actually don't teach to bunt so that they suck at it and they never get asked to bunt. But other hitters, it's kind of, it's a necessity. And it's a tool. This has been a discussion recently on Twitter where people are talking about eliminating bunts, and then suddenly we're watching a lot of college baseball and guys are bunting and getting a lot of hits. And one of the things about bunting that people don't understand is, you know, a manager has very little control over what goes on the field. It's basically, I have my parts, and my parts have percentages of success. That's my 1 through 9 hitters. Each one of them is stacked in a way that I think the guys that are going to get the most at bats, the 1, 2, 3 guys, are going to be my better hitters because they're going to get up more often. And so I need them to be the guys that get on base more often. So they get more at bats that way. But you know, bunting is something that the coach can do to control outcomes, to say, well, okay, I can't guarantee that this hitter's going to get a hit, but it should be pretty easy to get a bunt and move that runner so that a guy with another high percentage at bat or a batting average comes up and maybe can score that guy. Otherwise, the coach just gets to sit around and watch baseball and make moves and say, well, it's time to change pitchers. And so it's a mechanism that the manager could use to get involved in the strategy of the game. Hit and run is very much the same, not something as a coach I would ever use. I was never a fan of giving away outs, so I wasn't really much of a bunt guy, and I definitely wasn't a hit and run guy. But those are options that coaches can use, and it's something that we don't necessarily want to say outright that's a terrible thing. So bunting, when we talk about how to bunt, it's very much like that drill that I just showed you, that what I call disconnected consciousness of my hands. When I approached bunting, I always thought of bunting being similar to being a catcher. And the ball never really goes where the catcher calls for it. Pitcher throws it, and the catcher has to connect to the ball with his eyes. And you don't see the catcher making this kind of move to glove. Again, it's a very free move. His eyes are directing his hand where to go, or she, where to go to catch the ball. And there's no control over it. There's just thinking of seeing the ball, and okay, I go where it goes. And so when I see a catcher catch a pitcher, and I imagine that pitcher throwing 10 pitches, as long as the ball was within the catcher's reach, I would expect the catcher to catch all 10. And if our hitter were to eliminate their bat, eliminate the idea of controlling the outcome, and you put a glove on their hand, and they stood in the batter's box with the glove and looked at pitches, I would expect them to catch 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 of those pitches that were thrown to them. And so bunting, you really should think of your bat as a bunter as your glove is, again, relax. The bottom hand is the hand that really is the devil in this, because it's going to change any of those presets that you have. The bottom hand really is there so that when the ball hits the bat doesn't go flying backwards from the collision. The bottom hand is there to create some stability. But my hand is what I would use to bunt with, and I would think about bunting this barrel as if it were my glove. And I would think anything above my hand here is going to be the webbing of my glove where I catch the ball. And so when I want the ball to go slowly, rather than absorbing it and possibly missing, what I want to do is same thing that would happen if I were a hitter. If I hit the ball off the end of my bat, the ball's going to go slowly. I'm going to have a whole lot of vibration through my bat, and it's going to go slowly. And so if I want a slow bunt, rather than sucking the ball in and doing this, what I would do is bring my hand way up here to the top part of the barrel and catch the ball off the top of my barrel. Then I'm going to feel all this vibration. The ball's going to go pretty slowly off of my bat. If I wanted it to be sharper, I don't push at the ball. What I would do is catch it on my sweet spot. If I want it to be hard, but not quite as hard as the sweet spot, maybe I work a little bit lower down here in this area so that I'm still getting, I'm getting less vibration, I'm just getting some. And so the ball has a little bit firmer jump off of it. So those are things that you can practice with your hitters on controlling the speed of the ball off the bat without doing the things that are going to make you foul the ball off and miss it. When I talk about presetting, I face my barrel the direction that I want to go. So I do my warm-up bunting all one-handed with my hitters. And so if I want the ball to go to the third base line, then I point the barrel at the shortstop. If I want it to go down the right field line, I point the ball pretty much where the second baseman is standing. And then I just stand there and I catch the ball from these positions. And so if it's a lower pitch, I come down with this hand. I forget about this guy. I think of it as stability. I come down with this hand. And this way I'm going to pretty much assure that I'm not going to get much in the way of an opportunity to pop the ball up. It's going to work its way down. I got it a little angled here like this. And so I'll do some slow bunts here by presetting my barrel. There's my, pretty slow, and I'm catching right above my hand, more in that vibration area. And then I'll do some firm bunts.
Since they joined back into the Big East all season long, this is what it's not about the NCAA.
There we go. Okay, so what I'm doing here is not necessarily teaching my hitters how to bunt so much as I am teaching them to be less controlled with their hands over the bat. Just really allowing things to happen and letting my eye-hand coordination take control as opposed to controlling it with my hands. This is the video that I talked about a little earlier today in this discussion in the very beginning. And this is, the caption here is, one thing you will sometimes see with a player who gets their foot down too early is their hips will start to slide forward. This can cause them to lose space, energy, and affect bat path. Okay, is this true? Is there a one-to-one correlation between if I get down early, then my hips are going to fall forward? No, that is absolutely not the case. So he's suggesting that this guy is getting down too soon, therefore his hips are going forward. Well, this would have to do with usually anxiety and timing and trying to drive yourself forward. But in this guy's case, something that he's missing in this is that this hitter starts out pretty upright. Let's go here. He starts out pretty upright. So we've got our knee sitting inside of our foot, shoulder in a pretty direct line down through that as if there was a post running through it. And then we're going to allow him to move. And this is a guy who stacks back. He also drops into his legs a little bit. So now he is very off center here. Everything has moved off to the backside of his body. And so as he takes his stride, in order to get back to center, he's going to have to move his body off of his back leg back into center position, right? So now he's back to center again, and this is from this position where he starts his swing. So did his early landing have anything whatsoever to do with the fact that his hip was sliding forward? Absolutely not. And so I'll give you a three-piece picture of what we just saw. This is our centered position right here, where you see his head and everything. Here's his belt buckle, here's the middle of his body, here's his shoulder running through his leg and down into the ground as if there were a pole. Second picture is him going off center. Third picture is him returning to center. And so this had nothing to do with the hip slide that we talk about. We are going to talk about the hip slide, and we're going to talk about hitters that get off on their front side. And I'm sure absolutely everybody in this room has experienced this before with a hitter, a guy who gets out in front. I will often see this with my hitters that during their time off of baseball, they play golf. And so they have very much a golf transition to their bodies, which means they'll start out with their legs at the angle here, but as they transition their weight, they end up straight up and down over their front leg. And so they ride through. And so I've given this drill to a few guys and gone over it, but I haven't done a physical demonstration of the drill and how it works. And so that is what I'm going to do now for you. This is called my wall, and this has trained the most extreme of forward leaks from hitters that I've ever encountered. Serious golfers, boom, guys that hit off of their front side like this, here, boom, and we've all seen this. This has nothing to do with how early I landed. It has everything to do with what type of weight shift I'm using, and this is more of a push and a slide into my weight shift. And so what I do is I use something to offer some feedback, which is this wall here. And I'm going to set up my strides distance. So if your hitter, had a narrow stance, he'd want to start here and then stride into the wall. I'm going to start about 4 inches off the wall because that's my stride distance. And I'm going to stride into the wall and load together, boom. And now when I go to swing, my hands don't touch the wall. If I were to come off of my center position, this is my center where my shoulder is running straight down my leg. If I were to come off of that by about an inch, so if I had a slight leak to my hip forward, if I went boom here, leak forward just a little bit, my hands hit the wall, I'm off center, and then I return back to center and say, okay, that's how far I leaked forward. And so the hitter will have something to give them feedback. It's here, boom, bam, here, there's my arms, my hands don't touch the wall. The only time this drill doesn't work, you may meet this guy, but doubtful. I've only encountered it 1 or 2 times. If you met a hitter who had exceptionally long arms, like Kevin McHale had arms that were the equivalent of like a 7'3" guy, and he was 6'10". If their arms were exceptionally long, they would end up hitting the wall. This drill wouldn't work, but we don't find that guy too often in our lives. So not something that we need to worry about. So that's my remedy for the hip slide and things like that. You can talk to the hitter about it. You can tell them how to move properly, and we'll go over how to shift weight properly with another drill in a bit. Or you can give them feedback. You can give them a drill to do at home that will give them instant feedback, and they'll know exactly that they were moving forward. This won't be a matter of you or I being able to pick this out for them. They'll have this feedback directly. Okay, so my favorite video in the world that I play all the time for you guys, and I'll play it again, is how we begin naturally, untaught. Maybe the most instruction this hitter gets, this is my 2-year-old that I love to use, the most instruction he gets is him emulating what he's seeing. So this little guy has some little stylish things that he does because he watches hitters take swings, and he says, okay, well, I'll replicate those moves. But nobody really talked to him about weight shift. Nobody talked to him about loading. Nobody talked to him about any of these things. They came intuitively. And all of this tends to fall apart once we start getting instruction or cues. And those cues are usually ball control cues. Hit the ball up in the air, at a certain launch angle, and we're going to end up with all kinds of different types of swing paths that probably aren't. They're conducive to hitting that fly ball, but they're not conducive to consistency, and they're not the only way that we can actually hit the ball in the air. Again, when we talked about the tangential collision between the barrel and the ball, I can come straight at a ball, but still catch the bottom of it, and I'm going to get the ball to lift. So I'll use my little guy and do a quick slow-mo here. I believe rotation actually is perfectly natural, that our body finds solutions to movement patterns that require more than just a straight line path. Everything in this little guy's body is rotating other than, okay, his stride is linear because he's working towards the pitcher. His hand path is linear because he's bringing his hands out towards the ball. But everything else, his pelvis, his foot, his barrel is rotationally. So to say that it is unnatural and something that needed to be taught is, it's not intuitive to me. It doesn't make much sense at all. So what he hasn't learned that he does, and I will get, again, having worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young guys, I occasionally find players that their brains selected a really brilliant pattern. And it's uncommon when it comes to rotation. And evidence of the fact that it's uncommon is that we see so many different types of rotations from hitters at the big league level. The Mike Trout and the scissor kick and things like that, which is a removal of an obstacle that is blocking his pelvis from turning. It isn't the most efficient turn, but it's still, it doesn't cause a whole lot of delay. It doesn't cause much of a stall in your pelvis. It doesn't stop things if you were to remove the obstacle, which is what a lot of these guys do. They compensate for something that is blocking a movement. And occasionally I'll find a young hitter that does it perfectly, who lines up on the top of their back toe, makes a perfect turn. This is called a clean and efficient rotation. They're absolutely everything about it is perfect in terms of creating that rotational move to move my pelvis, to move my chest. Absolutely perfectly, without any resistance, without any what I call a friction-free move, which means that my foot is not attached to the ground and then grinding into the ground, which is creating force being pushed down from my shoulders and all of my body weight into the ground. If I'm wearing spikes, it's even worse. And turning that, squashing the bug move, which is highly friction based. And so this move is picking up the heel and rotating around and winding up on the top of the toe. Well, to do that, I created a drill. If I had a guy who scissor kicked, I still, naturally he came to me or she came to me and they scissor kicked. I'd say, well, you're not moving efficiently. So although you're achieving your objective of being able to move your weight and all of that stuff, let's teach you how to move correctly. I did this with Jared Sandberg because he had an injury mechanism, which we will talk about in a little while. But right now, this is the drill that I did with Jared over and over and over again that I'm about to show you. This is my 1, 2, 3, 4 drill. And I sent some of you this drill. And I think I may have demonstrated it on my lower body discussion, but the lower body discussion never got, let's see my feet. It never got recorded, so people don't have that as a reference. So what I do is I have my hitter widen out to the point they would be had they taken a stride. So I'm here and I'm here. Now what I do is I just kind of simplify all of this. I get them to get into a 50-50 position with their legs. So what I mean by 50-50 is I have the same size bend in each knee, and therefore I have the same weight ratios in my legs. So I'm 50% of my weight here, 50% of my weight here. On my first move, I'll have my hitter lift their heel by pointing their front knee at the ball. What this looks like in a real situation is instead of lifting my foot through my quad to take my stride forward, I'm going to lift through my knee. And I get that little pelvis turn that everybody wants to get. And I lift through that knee and then set down. So that would be my one move in this drill. So when I have the hitter set up, I say, okay, 1. And they point this knee at that ball. Now, what I don't want them to do is, and most of us will tell you this, you don't want to have this shift. You don't want to get stacked over here like I showed you in that video a little while ago. What we want to do is keep all of these movements below our hips. So when I do this, I'm still free in my back foot. My heel isn't down. I'm not heavy on my little toe. In fact, I tell my hitters to don't allow their little toe to be weighted when they make this first move. It's here. The second move is going to be our weight shift. We're just going to do a half of a move. Instead of setting my foot down, boom, and then making this move, what I do is I just keep this leg relaxed. I've pointed it, but it's relaxed. And so when I move this side towards the ball, my foot sets and my front foot now anchors for me. That's going to create that base that we want. All of this is happening, and my body is not moving back or forward. I'm staying in my center position. So it's 1, 2. On 3, I'll have the hitter load their front shoulder, as we've discussed. 3, and on 4, they're going to make a rapid move towards the ball, boom, and swing through. Most people's front knee is going to pull all the way back and brace. You'll notice mine doesn't. I don't have an ACL. I don't have any cartilage in that knee. It's actually slightly bent all the time. So I don't look perfect when I do it, but that's what we're trying to get, is that 1, 2, 3, 4 and that turn. And I'll do it again, and we'll go over where my foot is on my back side. Again, it's 1 in. And you can have your hitter hold their arms out so they really have an idea of where they're going with their body, or that their body isn't going anywhere. 1, 2, load, 3, 4, and I've finished on the top of my toe. You'll even see a little bounce out of my foot, which is great. I love to see that. I don't like to see a bounce out of the back foot and have the body move forward, because then I know they've pushed off of it and they've moved themselves. But if you get a little bit of a bounce out of that back foot, what we were talking about earlier was working friction free. When I'm working friction free, then there's nothing slowing the turn of my pelvis. And so that little bounce of my foot, or just the natural turn up and onto the top of the toe, if they didn't get some air on their foot, if it didn't bounce a little bit, then you're still moving incredibly efficiently, resistance free. So that's one of my favorite drills for a weight shift. That's the one that I use with Jared Sandberg. That reduced that lower body, or that lower back injury. And so we'll recall that. You'll see, and this is a move that a lot of guys are teaching, that first of all, it's linear, which is a drive of this back knee forward towards the pitcher, because we discussed this when we did our lower body conversation, how I said it's intuitive to say, I want to shift weight back to forward, therefore we make this kind of linear move, something that Paul Nyman was talking about, is that linear move, but it isn't intuitive. It's intuitive to the cue, right? So we're seeing his foot being dragged and his knee getting pushed forward, as opposed to this one where you see here, his heel is lifted because he's making a semicircle. He's driving his knee out towards the plate, as opposed to driving his knee towards the pitcher. And so then the next position that he winds up in here after this is, you'll see this is a 1, 2, and 3 of Jared doing that. So it's knee towards the plate, then it started to go towards the top of the toe, and then still. We look at the angle of his shoulder in relation to his backside. His shoulder is as if there were a pole running through it into the ground here. Again, here he is at halfway through his swing. His shoulder is still in line with his back leg. And then here he is at extension, and his shoulder is still in line with his back leg. So it runs right through the piping of his pants here. The injury mechanism, and I see it rather frequently actually on Twitter, and it makes me cringe. Gabe, who's here with us tonight, sent me a video of his son, and his son is 12, and his son has terrific aptitude. I'll give Gabe drills like the 1, 2, 3, 4, the wall drill, and things like that to help his son. And then a couple days later, he sends me a new video, and his son is now no longer leaking into his hip and things like that. And so his body, because he's young and he hasn't gone through puberty and the physiological change where we begin to resist a lot of new information physically, he's still, he's like Play-Doh. And so you can give him a drill and he does it, and it sticks pretty quickly. But here's a picture of him in that position where I saw this and I said, okay, I'm a little concerned that this could potentially turn into a pars fracture, which is a compression fracture of your lower back, your lower vertebra in the back, because he's got this arching back, because we're all told to keep your chest back, and so he exaggerates the drawback of his chest, but at the same time his lower body is pushing in this direction right here, and so you can see all of that is going to go into his lower back here. This is where you're going to see, you know, if you just imagine what's going on with their bodies, if his body were more upright here as opposed to angled back, then he wouldn't be putting as much stress on it. But still, because he's pushing that back leg so straight, he is going to definitely feel a little bit of stress out of that. Here is a video of a guy that I saw on Twitter a couple of years ago, and I grabbed it because I wanted to use it as an example to discuss injury mechanisms. And there are very few injury mechanisms. You all, as coaches, particularly as high school coaches, I don't know how common it is with females. So I'm going to speak to how common it is with males. It is, if you look up pars injuries, it is at epidemic status with young athletes. And I'm not exactly sure why. You may have a perfectly rotating hitter that isn't doing what Gabe's son is doing there, and they may end up coming into you, and you'll suddenly see their swing starting to look different. You say, "What's going on?" And you know, my back hurts a little bit. And then you send him to a doctor, and the doctor says he's got a stress fracture. A lot of it is coming from hard ground, basketball courts. That's the report I get back, the feedback I get back. And one of the doctors that I worked pretty closely with for a long time, sent a lot of my players to, is the head of both the Seahawks and the Mariners. And he is an orthopedic surgeon. And I've sent a lot of my players to him to get them healed up when they've torn things. But we discussed that, and he was talking about, you know, pars fractures and things like that with me, and how often they're occurring today. And nobody's exactly sure why, but they know where it's coming from, and it is coming from, particularly from running on and jumping on hard surface like basketball courts. I wonder if the wood and the flex has anything to do with it. I don't know. Here's a video of a guy that I saw that will really clearly. You're going to see a hard push, and again, that I've been taught to keep my chest back. So because I'm taught to keep my chest back, I don't allow this push of my lower body right here to push my upper body forward with it. So I'm going to arch it through my back, and I'm going to get this really hard push and pinch right into my lower back. So that's something we want to look out for, as particularly at the high school age. If you can catch it when they're younger, it's great, because then you can possibly prevent that type of an injury from occurring again. You want to eradicate it through your mechanical work. So we've got the 1, 2, 3, 4 drill covered. We have the wall drill covered. If I send anybody the wall drill, then I will reference another drill, which is the separation drill. When you're teaching a young hitter, or anybody who has like a flaw, like say, for example, that leak forward, when you're trying to teach them new mechanics or new moves, what you want to do is teach them the way you would teach a foreign language, which is, you can't get them to say a phrase. If they do, because they're thinking in English and they're used to speaking in English, then they'll stumble a lot through the phrase. And so it'll become muddled because they're not familiar with the language, and they're not familiar with the words or the inflection or all kinds of things with that. So what we want to do is break these things up and teach it like we would a foreign language, which is word for word as opposed to phrase to sentence. You want to do word for word, and they get very used to saying these words over and over and over again. And then they can start to couple those words and create a flowing phrase or sentence that way. A lot of people will do this. A lot of coaches will train this way by breaking things up into pieces. But unfortunately, what I see a lot is they don't put them back together. So you get these real, like, staticky looking hitters that are making moves that look like they're robotic. And so I'll get a hitter into my cage, and he'll suddenly step, pause, swing, pause, and I'll say, okay, So you had hitting instruction before, and your hitting coach told you to not shift weight when you take your step, and he told you to finish with a high finish. You said, yeah. And I said, well, yes. And he never put everything back together so it would flow again. So it looks really robotic. And this is where a lot of this type of training gets a bad reputation, because we have all of these coaches that are doing something that's right, but not exactly finishing the job. And so because of that, you'll get other hitting instructors that say, well, you don't want to train that way, because you end up with these hitters that look like robots. The training was right. It's just that, again, it wasn't a completed job. And so what we're talking about here is we're talking about doing the separation drill, which is the stride into the wall that I showed you first to the swing. And so if I have a hitter that when he's speaking in, say, Russian, which is kind of his faster swing that doesn't really make a smooth, clean phrase, they'll be doing things like this. And you because everything is happening so fast, and because they're also swinging with it, well, they're not feeling or recognizing that forward thrust of their body that they got. And so what we want to do is break it up and say, okay, we're going to take a step, and we're going to step and load together, which means draw this back, and we're going to pause for a moment, then we're going to swing. So we'll be here to here. Look at how far we rode over. Look at how your foot's starting to lift away. Okay, back, it's just step and land. Okay, now we're in the right position. Now we're in a good place to take our swing. And if they were to ride forward with their swing, you can address that as well. Once they've been able to do that, 1, 2, then we can start putting it together quicker. And it's the same thing that you want to do in the wall drill. You want to do the wall drill slowly, particularly if they're making errors and hitting the wall. It's here, boom, pay attention to the moves, and then do it until you're bored. The way we learn how to write rote memory, how we wrote our name over and over and over and over again when we were little kids, to the point where now we don't look at the paper, we can just sign our names and not look at it. Well, that's the same thing we're going to do here. So now we're going to put it together, bam, and it flows smoothly and easily, and everything's completed properly. Garrett had some questions that or at least one that was really great, was a timing question. And we're going to get more back to mechanics and things like that in a second, but it was, MLB players know how to time a pitch. Where is most of the focus? When working with MLB players and MILB players and down, did you seamlessly blend timing and mechanics? We'll separate the two, which is absolutely correct. And we've talked about how there's this obsession of people doing their gather timing, and then the rest is just innate. The ball's in the air and you swing at it and you run into it. For me, it's always been, particularly since the year 2000, it's been very intuitive to me, because I started to really understand timing and how many different components there were involved in timing, but most particularly that ball in the air timing and setting reference points and things like that. And that's what I would start working with my professional players. And I would say I work with a professional player no differently than I work with a youth player, because there isn't any difference in the physics. There's just a difference in the margins for error. Because the ball's moving faster, then it exaggerates any kind of timing flaw you have. But it's always been very intuitive to me for the last 25 years to say, well, or 20 years, to say, okay, you're down in time, but you're not making your decision. Getting to understand contact points, teaching them contact points has been the most important thing in respect to their decision timing. That was the most helpful thing, because they know where the ball is supposed to be met. And so we talked about this when we discussed timing last week or the week before. When I'm meeting an outside pitch at my front foot, I know I was about a foot early on it with my contact point. Should have been a foot farther back. And so I can correlate that with I attacked the ball a foot too early in respect to where I made my decision out in front of me. I think I hope I can explain things well enough, but then I find I've sat next to a lot of guys that use the same approach in every hitter, use the same stuff. I took for granted that I saw things the same way everybody else saw things. Maybe I just was a little more analytical about it. But I think I probably also see things differently than people because I found I couldn't teach another instructor to do some of the things I have been able to do. That 3-2-0 drill, that you've done successfully. I've taught a lot of guys how to do it, but they couldn't intuitively time the pitch speed properly to match the swing speed. So there's a certain skill involved in that as well. So I don't know that timing of live pitches is going to be something that everybody's going to get and everybody's going to be able to teach well. It's the reason why I created tech, to solve that problem. I wish I avoid. I talked a bit about my tech in I think my second discussion on timing, but I avoid talking about it because I'm not here to be a salesman. I'm not here to sell you on things. I am going to do a lot of detailing of studies and things like that I've looked at that have to do with behavioral learning processes and the introduction of signals and cues, and then the slow fade of those cues, and the habit or behavior remains, and that would be in our case timing. And how some of the big questions I've gotten about my tech is, well, yeah, there's not going to be a tone when you're facing a pitch, so it couldn't work. A big league team said this when they were rejecting the idea of my tech. Well, we use cues, tones on dogs when we train them. We use them on people to teach them to not bite their nails or smoke cigarettes. Cue-based behavioral learning has been around for a very long time, and it's very effective. We can talk about subliminal messaging, which is we're seeing something, but we're not consciously seeing it, and our subconscious is now says, well, I'm hungry and I want popcorn. That's the best I can give you in terms of timing and training timing. The stuff that you and I have talked about, recognizing how early or how late somebody is based on their contact points, and then saying, well, then you swung a foot too early or 2 feet too early. So now we have to determine where the ball was when you determined to swing at it, and then make an adjustment off of that. This is something that I see a great deal of, and that is the graduating plate. And so how this ostensibly works is, here I am, and the pitch is being thrown, say, from a machine or somebody's arm, and they're, throwing the same speed every time, or the machine, usually they're doing this with machines. Let's say we set the machine at 80 miles an hour, and the hitter stands in here and hits off of this one. And then he hits it successfully a couple times, and then he steps up to this one. And then he hits it successfully a couple times, and then he steps up to this one, and then he hits it a couple times. Well, he's getting closer and closer to the pitch. The pitch hasn't changed speeds. It's still 85 miles an hour. But what he's done is changed the distance of the ball and his contact point, and thus affected his reaction time. This has nothing to do with processing the ball differently based on different speeds. It's not going to help you in respect to how you read pitches and how you apply that. This is going to help you feel like I've created enough space to be able to hit a pitch that was 85 and then maybe 90, and let's say 95. Let's just pretend that that's what the graduating velocities equivalents were. It will help you with that reaction to tell you that you mechanically set up in time to be able to execute this task. Now, does that mean I can step into the game now, having never seen a 95-mile-an-hour pitch, but having practice at the equivalent of a 95-mile-an-hour pitch? Does that mean I would know when to swing? No, because I have not seen the ball moving at that velocity and dilating at that velocity as it approaches me. So I wouldn't be able to use that as actual timing. This would be more creating space timing. Am I able to fit the time component of my swing within the changing time frame of shorter distance at that same velocity? So it does serve its purpose, and that's one of the things that a lot of people have asked me in respect to what we discussed a week ago on short cage work, because many of you don't have full-size cages. And so I've been asked, well, if we don't have a full-size cage to practice, how can we practice game speed? And I said, well, you can't. You can practice certain aspects of it, like this, getting into a position to create enough space between you and the ball to execute your swing on time. But it won't transfer to a game to say, I know when to swing at 95-mile-an-hour pitches now. I know what distance the ball should be to swing at a 95-mile-an-hour pitch, because this drill doesn't ever practice that. So it's good. It's good for an aspect. It says your hitter doesn't have such a long swing that he can't swing within a 310 millisecond pitched ball event, right? And I say 310 because 100 milliseconds is spent just picking up the ball, and then what's remaining from a 90-mile-an-hour pitch is about 310 milliseconds or so, or 95, I should say. Some of the stuff I'm seeing, particularly with the farm board, which goes back to when I was talking about efficient rotation versus a rotation that is compensatory to a block. They're using two boards, and they're actually sliding and angling their feet. And this is one of those things that I've heard a long time ago from the hitting coach at University of Washington at the time. And he was telling his hitters that if you were to stride towards the field that you wanted to hit to and angle your body and swing that direction, you'd hit the ball harder. Well, first of all, we're dealing with delaying our strides based on where the ball is, which is a defensive approach to hitting, saying, I'm not going to get myself in a position to hit until I know what location that pitch is. I don't recommend that type of thing. It really, really shrinks that time available that you have to hit and make decisions and things like that. Secondly, and most importantly, is you actually aren't going to hit the ball harder just because you're facing the field that you want to hit to, because our energy wants to run in the opposite direction of the ball. And so this is an outside pitch, and obviously it's a left-handed hitter, so he's hitting this ball to left field. Both of these are going to go to left field. One of these guys has slid himself over into an angle towards left field so that he can drive through the ball and send his energy into left field along with it. Well, what's happening is his energy is running tangential to the energy of the ball. The ball's coming north-south. His swing is kind of working in a southwest kind of or southeast kind of a position. Whereas in the picture next to it over here, batter number 2, he's working in direct opposition to the energy of the ball. So he's going to be putting more force into the ball. Both balls are going to be going in the same direction, but he's going to have a harder hit ball. The reason for this is something called the coefficient of restitution, which we discussed when we were talking about barrels of bats, of metal bats being limited. Coefficient of restitution is basically an energy exchange or a diminished energy exchange. If I'm running tangent to the ball coming in towards me, then there's energy that's going to be lost between the bat and the ball during that collision. It's going to be burned off. It's going to turn into spin. It's going to be all kinds of things. Well, not all kinds of things, a few things. And so I'm going to be limiting the amount of force that I'm putting on the ball, even though I feel like I'm hitting in the direction that I want to hit the ball into. I'm not running in direct opposition to the energy of the ball coming at me. So I hope that makes sense. I've never, delaying your landing is kind of a newer thing. Guys with a floating stride and saying, okay, I don't want to put my foot down until I swing. This is sort of a new school philosophy. Probably one of many things that I believe is the reason that batting averages that nobody cares about are going down more and more. Consistency is suffering from it because you're really trying to be way too exact with things. And we're not erring towards creating more time and saying, okay, having more time is a great thing because then it's easier to hit when I'm waiting for something to get to me as opposed to trying to sync everything together at the same time. This is a philosophical discussion, and this is something that I personally wouldn't teach a hitter to do, is to delay their landing. I would get them to land. And again, when we looked at Nelson Cruz last week, that half-second landing, that the 400 milliseconds of pause that he has isn't significant. It isn't like the hitter is going to be like, oh, I got to let go of this. He's just created enough time to really be able to control the ball. And I think that is the most important thing to all of us. And so I'm just not exactly sure, other than, wow, it sure feels great to sync everything together and land and swing at the same time. It doesn't produce more power. It doesn't do anything that a lot of these people espouse that it does, other than it manages whatever anxieties you might have had you landed earlier. I would say don't placate the anxiety. I would say address the anxiety by removing it entirely. Again, that's philosophical. That's what I would train a hitter to do, and that's what I have trained hitters to do, and it's what you'll see in hitters that have a lot of success. But you're also seeing guys that are having a lot of success doing it the other way. So that's why I say it's philosophical. I think as far as I'm concerned, in respect to drills and things like that I have to show you, I've completed it. I can talk about some of the other remedies for things, and so I have those written down. I don't have drills or anything like that for it that are printed out, but I have them written down. I'll explain those to you for some common errors. We talked about the connection and that more golf philosophy that's involved. The reason why connected swings and golf kind of merged over is a lot of this golf sector information, like metrics, has come into play with baseball, because they're using the same swing capture devices to measure. And so they're starting to apply a lot of golf swing philosophy. Well, golf swing philosophy, or modern golf swing philosophy, is based on reducing freedom of motion. And when I reduce freedom of motion and confine myself to only being able to make certain moves by eliminating things, creating intentional blocks of my body, then I reduce error. With that, you reduce error on a ball that isn't moving, that's still, that you've addressed, and it's going to be exactly where you expected it to be because you set yourself up to it. And so any kind of slight move off of that would, in fact, create a different outcome for the ball. Baseball is very different, and freedom of movement is very important to us. The ball is never actually where we originally addressed. We don't have any idea where it's going to go. And so it isn't that you're going to hit it harder with this connected swing. So you don't want to have a rotational swing. When I teach a swing, what I want to do is create as quick a swing as possible that has as little superfluous or negative movements as possible, so that when the body responds to the message to go, only thing it's doing is going forward, and it's working towards the ball. Now, the connected swing, or some of the teacher man stuff, we're rotating our chest and turning. Well, we'll look at video of really great hitters, and we'll see, here he is swinging, and his chest is moving, his hands haven't budged, so your hands should be attached to your shoulder. Well, what's actually happening is you're looking at 150 milliseconds of time. And we talked last week and the week before about the kinetic sequence and how our lower body turns, then it turns and engages and torques our upper body, which then turns, which then last goes out to our arms. And as our bat starts to go farther forward, then it begins to extend out here. People are ascribing connected swings to swings that aren't connected at all. They're connected in that the sequence is working properly, and where you're looking at it, their hands aren't moving forward because their chest is now doing this. And then once their chest naturally decelerates, that's when their hands are going to start to extend forward. But that isn't that I've frozen everything. It just appears that way in a video slowed down that actually was 150 milliseconds of time. Okay, so when I have a hitter that over-rotates their chest too much, some of the drills that I'll do, you talk to them about the sequencing, you talk to them about naturally decelerating, and then it's just a lot of words, really. But once they feel something, then they can start making an association with the words that you just shared with them. So when I have a hitter that has this tendency to really open way too soon, Well, I know that they're tightening all these muscles and holding on to these muscles. And so everything becomes a rigid, frozen connection. My arms, my chest, my head, everything goes this way. And so you can't help but move your head away as you're opening up when you're really tight like this. So a drill that I would do, and I saw a coach do this drill, and you throw it hard, and I don't know, that was a sadist, because I don't want my hitters to get hurt just learning how to swing. But what he would do is throw the ball hard at their crotch. And if they pulled their heads, they were wearing the ball and singing soprano for the rest of the day. Okay, I don't want to kill my hitter and make him cry or hurt him. So I will throw it at kind of an easy speed, soft toss speed, where you're kind of lobbing at them, and throw the ball at their belt buckle. And so what they're doing is they're catching the ball way deep in their swing as if it was an outside pitch. It's just an outside pitch coming from the side. And you want to have them be able to keep their heads where they made their contact. And because they have this forced feedback of, if the ball hits me, maybe if it hits me in the junk, it's going to hurt, that they kind of like start to relax things and start to organize their movements a little bit differently. And so that was a good way to do that. Another one was the open stance drill. And this is the sort of thing that, gets ridiculed by the Shigan guys. Because, well, I hit that way. Well, it's really just a drill to illustrate something. And so I would have them set up, here's my outside corner of my plate. I'd have them set up here, and I would work balls on the outside. You don't want to throw in on them. I'd work on the outside. And this is going to do two things for you. First is you want them to hit. They're not going to be using their lower bodies. You want them to hit, just throwing their bat through the ball and keeping their chest facing into that right center position right here. Boom. Okay, so that helps them with the disconnecting their chest after they've twitched, because part of that system of how we use our lower body to be the motor to start everything, there's also the firing of my lats and my core behind it when I do decide to swing. So the check swing is, my lower body's going to turn, but my hands are only going to stop here. My barrel stays. I'm going to use my short bat so I don't hurt things. I do this and take a check swing. Well, I fire my core, my lats, when I actually decided to swing. I said, yes, everything is right. So my lower body's gone. And that's that kind of yes, yes, no that you see from guys. This is the no, is the check swing. And the yes is, okay, I'm firing the rest of my upper body muscles, the lats and the core behind it. And so that drill right there is just basically working on the upper body firing. We've eliminated the lower body from it. We're throwing the bat into right center field, essentially, and just poking the ball. It also helps with the extension of the top hand. Some guys get a little too over dominant with their bottom hand. Their top hand isn't going to get through. And so that drill also helps them I have the hitter, oftentimes I'll use the cue of think about taking your top hand and punching through the ball into right center field. And so that helps these guys that have the chest that flies open. When we talked about overuse of the upper body and the hands, particularly the hands and arms, another drill that I use with a lot of hitters is that check swing that I just described to you. And in that check swing, what I have them do, and I think I demonstrated this in my very first discussion that is not on here, it didn't get recorded, I may have, is working with open hands. And stride, boom, stop. Hands always open. Stride, stop. Right here, hands still wide open. And so I could, if I wanted to, follow all the way through and throw the bat at my wall and put a hole in it, but instead, I just want to make sure that the hitter isn't, because what they do, and the other thing that drill does, this check, is it maintains the shape of my arms. And we've talked about that, how Jared, at one stage in his career early, was here and then swinging here. So we get real tight, and as soon as we get tight, then everything starts to stretch, and as all these other systems start to work, this lags behind and gets long. And instead we're going, boom, here, maintaining that L shape and not creating length to our swings. Length to our swing with that straighter arm, some people will might say you were pushing your bat or casting your bat out, but it has everything to do with the length of your swing. So it's going to have this early turn, and they have all this stuff to remedy the push of the bat, which you weren't pushing. It's just basically the shape of your arms. And if you were to not allow your arms to get long, you're not going to have as big a problem with this casting issue, unless you literally threw your hands over here, which you wouldn't do. So again, I've heard a lot of solutions to problems that wasn't actually the problem to start with. It was a misrepresentation of the problem and then a new solution. Stay connected, do this, this stuff. So that's that open hand drill is another one that I used quite a lot. When I do the wall drill, when I do the 1, 2, 3, 4 drill, when I do the separation drill that I showed you, the 1, 2 drill, I integrate lots of breathing with that stuff. And we've talked about how we want to begin to model or mirror our breath patterns with our movements. And so all of those drills, not only am I performing these mechanical drills, I'm also having the hitter use their breath to recognize their loads, smooth and complete, as opposed to gasping kind of moves, And when my move is faster than my breathing is, then I'll recognize that. I'll immediately, again, have feedback that says, oh, I don't need somebody else's eyes to tell me that I was moving abruptly and quickly because I felt it, because it didn't match the way I was breathing. So those are very good things to add on to all those drills, because we have talked a lot about the breathing stuff. That is probably the number one signature I have on a hitter is, you won't be able to look at a hitter that I work with and know immediately based on their swing that they worked with me, unless you were paying attention to the way they were breathing. Talking about hands, and this goes back to Jim, and we were talking about how barrels pull down and they're starting to drag on you. I showed everybody, I'm going to use a light bat, see contrast a little better. I showed everybody about a year ago different hand positions. First, we talk about how you want to be palm up, palm down, right? And so a lot of guys will say line up your knuckles so that you're palm up, palm down at your finish position. I hate this. It feels horrible to me. It feels horrible to a lot of hitters. You look like and feel like you're in handcuffs, and it's totally unnecessary, because here I am in my boxed position where my knuckles are aligned like this, not my knocking knuckles, but like this. So now I have a little more freedom. My elbow's a bit out of the way. And as I come through, as this barrel starts to turn and everything is starting to rotate forward, I end up palm up, palm down. So this bat, just if I tighten this, then I end up, this is why I don't, by the way, I don't pine tar my top hand. I tell all my hitters, don't pine tar your top hand. All my big league guys that say, I know you got used to it, strip this. You want this guy to be sticky, you want this guy to be able to be free and rotate, so that when the bat moves, you're not sticking to it and kind of rolling your barrel and turning it around and things like that. And so that's the first thing we want to talk about, is the options of aligning, and you will end up palm up, palm down, even if you started in a box position. You're going to end up right here, because that's just how the way things work. The other thing is that as we swing, and when we are doing slow motion swings and showing people, the barrel isn't really sitting the way it's actually going to be sitting, because I have to support it. The weight of this bat is pulling this direction. It just wants to follow the floor. And so I have a bit tighter a grip when I'm doing demonstrations than I would in swinging. And the barrel is kind of an unnatural place. It would probably sag a lot more, depending upon where the pitch was. And I would just keep keeping some freedom in my hands. But anyway you look at it, the barrel, and it's particularly if we're dealing with Jim's hitters that don't like these heavy end-weighted bats, because they feel like they're pulling down here on them, which they are. Well, what you want to do is you can create a notch. And if any of you have a bat with you right now, you can do this. I'll do it with my short bat, so I can try to do it one-handed. So my barrel wants to pull this direction when my hands are in this guy right here. If I create this little notch right here, then I create a bridge for that bat. And now really easily, without any effort at all, I can hold this barrel up. And so it's not going to stop me from having any vertical bat angle, which is going to have everything to do with how my wrists rotate while I swing, and direct my barrel for me based on what my eyes are telling me to do. But it'll help me with some of that sag in the bat. Garrett had a young guy in his cage one time. He showed me a video of it, and he had just an enormous bat, and it was woo! It looked, it was yanking down on him. Well, he would have been able to support it. He couldn't have moved it faster, but he could have supported it a lot easier if he created that little notch, because it's going to bridge and hold that barrel up. Here's what this. I'll use a regular size bat here. That's what the bat wants to do in my hand. It is really making me work in my forearm to hold it up. Right, and you see the barrel just kind of yanking down on me, and so I'm naturally doing this. This is just, it's work to hold this guy up. So now I take this bridge and I create it, and I can very easily support this barrel. So it's just this position here. The guy who did that was Edgar Martinez. He had that position in his hands. So we're going to continue on with talking about our hands and some of the tightening of the back elbow and things like that, that kind of tight lift. We talked about how baseball, softball, it's a confrontation, and somebody's throwing a rock at me. And so when I'm thinking about the confrontation, I'm thinking about getting into this physical tight position, and it makes me feel strong. I have to relax all that to move anyway, so it really doesn't do anything. It's just more of a psychological outlet. But I'll have guys that get just a little too much hop in their elbow when they go back to lift. Well, what's happening is, if we were to, again, those of you who have a bat with you, you could squeeze the bat with any one of these fingers until you get to this small digit here. And as soon as you swing that guy, you're going to feel all the tendons in this arm start to activate. And so I can squeeze here and nothing in my arm is really going on. And as soon as I hit that little toe, that little finger, a little digit there, then I'm going to feel all this tension in this arm. And so it's a real good indicator that my hitter is getting some tension in their hands, and that's why that elbow is popping up so much on them and getting tight, which then it just has to relax in order to start to swing anyways as it goes into the slot. Something you can do, again, I'm not one for placating hitters or giving them outlets for things that I think that they should not do. I'd rather go to the source of that problem. But something you can do is, again, when we talked about creating this bridge, you can let them squeeze that thumb onto their index finger if they want it. If they really felt like, but I feel good when I have some tension up here, well, then go ahead and let them do that. It's not going to activate that elbow. Here I am hitting that little finger, and there's that elbow popping. Well, here I am just squeezing that index finger onto my thumb, and I'm not getting any reaction out of my back elbow. So again, another remedy for you for a guy that might be obviously showing some tension in that back elbow. So I think I've presented everything on my list. I will talk about one last thing, because we're on hands. We talked about how we get this electrical impulse to this dominant hand right here. When the dominant hand is working too much, not naturally, not going because my eyes are saying take your dominant hand to it, but actually tightening and working it and trying to make that happen, we actually override our gross muscles. We become more upper body oriented hitters, and those gross muscles now, the large muscles in my lower body, my legs and things like that, are less involved when I start to use my hands more. So the tighter I get my hands, the less I'm relying on some of my other gross muscles. My hands, my arms here are all what we call fine muscles, or fine motor muscles. They control the fine movements, whereas these big muscles, my thighs, my butt, my quads, they all are working at creating strength for me. These guys are fine and finesse kind of muscles. So if I overdo my finesse muscles by tightening them up here, then I deactivate or don't use my lower body quite as well, or those gross muscles. So then I believe that checks every box on my list. I gave you the hit or die. I gave you the open stance. Both of those are for the guys that have the chests that move too fast, open up, take the head, all of that stuff. The cue, again, for not pulling your head has nothing to do with they intentionally pulled their head. It had everything to do with everything freezing and becoming one unit. And so therefore my head goes where my chest is going. It can move independently. If I were to twitch and let go, my chest will still turn and decelerate, but won't take my head with me because I haven't become one frozen unit from the waist up. So you want to talk to your hitters about minimizing or managing their energy. 100% of energy, 100% of energy goes into swinging the bat, but that's just to get it started. And everything after that is swimming while you're flying off of a cliff. You know, you're not going to go any farther because you're swimming in the air. And that's basically how I view a bat swing. You're not going to make it faster because you're working harder through here. You'll actually make it slower because as you tighten, then everything starts to slow down and move only at the speed of, say, your chest or your hands. You know, if it all became one unit, then it is moving the speed of your chest, which is not going to be that fast. So that's everything I had to add to this. I'd like to go into questions. I would like to offer you guys, if you do have some video that you want to share with me and with the group, then we can go over those. Anyone?
Talk about, if you don't mind, one-hand drills.
One-hand drills, great. That's awesome. That is something I didn't go over. Again, remember when we talked about in the beginning how I said that I don't want the front arm to do this? And I'll see plenty of great hitters doing this, but it's not something I really want to practice. When I do one-handed drills, and that's what this guy is here, and I have another one for little kids, which is this guy here. I use this with little kids. What I want to do with this is when my hitter is set and hitting with the front hand, it's going to be this. It's going to be dropping it down to the ball. So I don't want to see him do this. I don't want to see a line drive. Just like I said, when they're doing this drill, I don't want to see liners. I don't want to see liners from this front hand when I'm doing this. I just want to see them drop through, come forward, allow the barrel to turn over, hit the ball into the ground. When I do my backhand, what I want to do is I'm already going to set. Remember, my backside, we talked all about this kind of loading in my front side. My backside isn't doing anything when this front side is moving me towards the ball. And so I'm already going to start this in a slot position. So my front hand will have already taken me here. And so my elbow gets into this slot. And so now when the ball comes, I have the batter throw the knob at the pitcher as if it were a spear. So I'm not working it towards the ball. I'm going out here and then back around it. I just have them throw forward. The barrel breaks forward here. So it's here, here, as opposed to here to here, that kind of turn, or this kind of like control turn. It's throw, relax. That's my front hand backhand drills that I do with that. I don't spend a whole lot of time on the back, more, because again, that's my natural hand. That's the one that wants to drive forward. It's the one that changes direction for everything. So I'll usually focus on one hand, boom, two hands, boom. Because again, it's kind of awkward to set your hand down here and do that weird stuff. And so I go front hand, bam, ball on the ground, two hands. So you'll get the grounder out of the front hand, you'll get the liner when you get two hands. Does that help?
Yes, you mostly did all those pitches like right waist high down the middle? Or...
Yeah. I mean, I don't, and remember when I talked about, I wanted to mention this. So yeah, I threw it down the middle. Remember when I was talking about doing this toss at their crotches from the side view? When I do soft toss, particularly that drill, you want to stand or sit on your bucket at their back leg. If you're sitting in the middle of their bodies or in front of them and you're working that outside thing, you stand a great chance of getting nailed with the ball. So if you're standing off their backside, there's no way for them to get the ball back there. So yeah, I generally, when I do any kind of drills that are simple drills, when I'm doing soft toss, I'm always lobbing right in front of their front foot and allowing them to just work the same as a tee on a simple pitch and getting the ball to do what it should do. Occasionally, I might mix it up and throw something back on them to make sure they're not turning their chests. But generally, I'm just working belt high kind of stuff when I'm doing my easy short work or sort of non-heavy training of timing stuff. But when I do the 3-2-0 drill, I'll generally be working towards their belts as well, just so they get their contact points through there. And then, the chaos enters into the picture when you start working at longer distance and higher velocities. And then, the fixation on vertical bat angle is such a strange thing to me, because your hands are going to go, your eyes are looking, it's going to accommodate the fact that the ball's lower or higher in the zone. Your wrists are just going to take care of all of that for you without having to think about it. Why we want to measure it, it would be important to measure it in golf, again, because any deviation off of this, because we've addressed a ball that isn't moving, so we know exactly where it should go and how it should be hit. Well, yeah, then I suppose measuring vertical club angle is very helpful. With a moving ball, it isn't, because my wrists are going to take care of that based on where the ball is in the zone. And I could sit here and tell you that it's 37 degrees for a middle outside pitch at your knees. And for you to replicate 37 degrees, I mean, how are you going to do it? Even if you took a swing and then somebody said, well, no, that was 24 degrees, then don't do, you just can't control things that finely, and it doesn't make any sense.
Typically, like, how many reps do you do? If you're doing one hand, how many times? How many?
I do everything in fives. Live pitches off the machine, I would do between 5 and 8, but always in fives. And the reason for that is I'll watch guys come into a cage and spend $20 on a half of an hour and just swing and swing and swing and swing and swing over and over again. And this is a game that doesn't demand a great deal of endurance. You get 7 or 8 pitches, if you have a long at bat. Sometimes there are three pitches, sometimes it's 1 pitch. And I want to be able to spend all of my energy on those 3 swings that I just took. And I don't want to fatigue. And so you keep the hitter in there longer, they end up either starting to swing slower because they start to manage their energy differently, or they're swinging slower because they're exhausted. And so when they get exhausted, remember, we're not using 100% of our muscles. We're not using everything. And so now when these muscles start to fatigue, then other muscles start to compensate. I start developing some habits. And so I took 10 minutes maybe, or let's say 5 minutes really, of pretty good swings. And then the next 25 minutes of swings were all garbage because I was exhausted and I should have gotten out of the box. And so if you go into a machine and you want to hit for a half of an hour, you swing 5 swings, get out, breathe, relax, watch some balls go by, step back in. And you don't get out of the box because you're exhausted. I pull a hitter out of the box and they're going, no, I'm fine. I go, I know you're fine. I want you to remain fine. I don't pull you out of the box because I thought you were getting tired. I pull you out of the box to prevent you from getting tired, so that every time you readdress, you're fresh. You still have plenty of energy to use. So that's a terrific question. And it's something that I really should have brought up, because that is a thing that I see all too often, is a hitter that just goes out there and swings for a long time, or a coach that keeps just throwing pitches. The other thing that is really important is, as coaches, and it happens, and I teach hitters how to deal with this during tryouts, but it happens frequently, is, you're behind that L screen and you are an absolute machine gun. This game is so slow, and I want my hitter to go through their routines every time, is set up, again, recognize the tension in their body, breathe, relax, be ready to hit again. And as coaches, when we're controlling the tempo of our workouts, we want to give the hitter plenty of time between each pitch so that they can go through that routine, A, to create a habit, and B, because that's what they're going to be doing in a game. And so we want to slow our tempo up and not rapid fire quite so much. When my hitters are in tryouts and the coach just doesn't have a choice because he's looking at 30 hitters in a day, then I tell him to take pitches in between. And then I'll see that happen. Sammy Sosa was really good at that at Home Run Derby, where he'd hit a ball and then the next pitch was thrown and it might have been a cookie, but he just wanted to gather himself. And so he lets that one go, then he swings at the next one. And that's what I would recommend my hitters do. Gets a little dangerous at tryouts because the coach just wants to get through it and just get your 8 swings in so I get an idea of what kind of hitter you are and get to the next guy. So when you're taking pitches, sometimes it angers the coach, but it is something that they need is that time, because they may be setting back up in the box real tight because they're rushing to get back because they're afraid, you're going to be waiting on them and they don't want that to happen. So that's something that I think is important also. Any other questions? I think I got Jim's questions covered on the bat stuff. Garrett, if you haven't.
Can you do anything? So I was thinking of that picture of Garrett's son that you put up, and I'll see that quite, especially with younger girls where.
Gabe's son.
I'm sorry?
Gabe's son.
Oh, Gabe's son. I'm sorry. Where they don't really have they haven't developed a lot of core strength yet, and that back foot will just kind of slide underneath them, and that back leg gets straight, and they haven't really rotated much at all. From a cue standpoint, a couple things I do, and I'd love to have your opinion on it. I'll have one where I kind of intentionally close their stance and really force them to work that pelvis through. I'll do some where I'll cue that right knee into the plate. Do you have any other cues like that where I just call them like floppy legged kids, where they just turn their foot and nothing has really happened?
So you're talking about their backside back foot's turned.
Their back foot. So it looks a lot like the picture where their foot's completely turned, and sometimes they're so dang flexible, their toes pointed behind their front foot, and their
yeah, I've seen that.
I mean, it just hurts me to see it sometimes.
Right. Well, so I wouldn't say Gabe's son necessarily turned his lower body and nothing was happening. So that's
he did, but I was just thinking about just the way that back leg looked and that foot looked.
Right. And then I'll go over that because that's a good question. And then if I haven't answered all of your questions fully, we'll come back to the next one. But with that kind of pushing back foot, again, sometimes it has to do with how they've shifted weight by pushing it off. And they get this kind of leg like my guy who was in single A who did that. Or Gabe's son's case, which is what you called out, was kind of like establishing balance there. And so he takes a good swing and then he does this one to keep his balance. Well, that kind of pause that you're talking about, or that we're discussing here, is totally unnecessary, because what's the next thing you do after you hit the ball? Run to a base. Yeah. And so I have the hitters, instead of, finding their balance by stabilizing through kind of like this long back leg thing, I have a break into their front knee. It's swing, hit, run to first. Because my next move is this guy right here. And so I kind of just position them into imagining right after you've made your contact, break into that front knee so that you're in a position to run to first. And so you don't have to do this with everybody, because not everybody does that. A lot of us will collapse pretty nicely and everything's good. But the one danger of it is, and I was watching one of the hitters that I was working with doing this on YouTube, or not YouTube, on Twitter recently, was I was watching that front knee start to bend. And I really had to make sure that front knee was bending after they had completed their turn and swung, as opposed to during. Because if that front knee is bending during, we're actually dissipating a lot of weight into that front side. When we talked about changing the ratios and moving weight and kind of moving off center and things like that, or softening some of the force by driving into that front knee like that. And it turned out it was actually after contact. So we had the front leg straighten out, and then it was just a little bit of a break afterwards. And that's okay. And so rather than have them straighten out that back leg, which is a whole extra move that wasn't part of their swing to start with, then have them collapse into that front knee and kind of like even practice positioning, getting into that running down to the first base line kind of move. So does that help with that part of your question?
Yeah, it's just cues to help them, because what a couple of them, and you see it again, especially with these are younger girls, they're actually straightening the back leg and sliding the back foot underneath them
backwards
instead of the rotate. Yes.
Okay, so
rotating through.
Right, and that's the scissor kick that we discussed. That was very different than what Gabe's son was doing. That's that scissor kick that I discussed earlier that that 1, 2, 3, 4 drill helps you with. The reason why that back leg is sliding out of the way is because my pelvis only gets to about 2/3 of its turn if that back leg isn't turning along with it and it starts to anchor. And so what my brain does is says, remove the obstacle. The obstacle is that foot acting as an anchor and stopping my pelvis from turning. So they kick that foot out of the way and then the pelvis continues through. Mike Trout does this. And so, that didn't have anything to do with, and if it got straight, it got straight. I mean, a guy who did that all the time, the first guy that I really noticed do it because it was so exaggerated was Roberto Clemente. He had just a monster of a kick around. He was very much a front foot hit guy. Everything kind of like pivoted off of that front side. But yeah, it's just if you teach your girls how to rotate properly by creating a circle. Forgetting about the bad cue is move weight back to forward, because again, that turns into a straight line and that straight line starts to obstruct our turn isn't going to happen because we're not thinking about rotation, we're thinking about linear. And so that turn gets held up and they've got to remove that obstruction to continue through.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. And again, anybody who doesn't have that drill yet, I send me your email address in a DM and I will mail that to you. And then you will have my demonstration of it on this, it's going to be on YouTube tomorrow. So you'll be able to refer to it. And I think I'll do the same with this one, even though this isn't like the 3-hour long one that we did before. I'm going to separate this probably into parts to make it easier and name the parts and say, here's the section that had the 3-2-0 drill. If it's easy enough for me. If it isn't, then it's just going to be 2 hours that you can fast forward through. Any other questions? No. Okay, then I think again.
I'll share a video if anybody wants to take a look.
Oh, love to.
This is pretty much what we see a lot of, and you've seen this kid already. I've sent him, but I just was at the cage and I watched him the other day again. He'll be a high school kid with the team that I'll be with, but I didn't say anything. I just watched it.
Right.
So we can kind of look at the common things that these kids do. And yes, he is very athletic, but if you look at it, I'd say you pretty much could say his lower body doesn't do anything for him. But okay. We'll share it and you can take a look.
Awesome, perfect.
You have the disabled participant screen sharing.
How dare me? Let's see. How do I do this? I thought that I enabled that screen share from the outset. Here it is. Yeah, it says one participant can share at a time. I'm not sharing, so I don't see why you can't. So here, I'll just hit multiple and see if that works for you. That solve it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Can you see that? I'm zooming again.
Perfectly.
I'm just going to play it here.
Okay, I've seen plenty if you want to start talking about it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So first of all, we talk about, this angle is pretty much, well, not pretty much, it's directly side angle.
Yep.
So we're not getting a real great indication of how much bend he has in his knees, but his start position tells me he doesn't have a great deal of bend in his knees. He doesn't have much weight down. So they're already oriented towards, we're going to be upper body dominated. He has a pretty significant rock backwards. He goes way off of center when he goes into a stride and then drifts back in. He doesn't come off center with that drift back in. I don't like it because, especially as oriented as a lot of hitters are these days, of delaying their foot strike to their decision to swing at the ball, that means the ball's flying towards them. And so now if they start to float forward, they're actually moving forward while the ball's moving towards them, which is really disruptive to my prediction of how quickly the ball's getting to me, because I am moving towards a moving object as opposed to being steady against a moving object. So that creates a bit of a timing issue. And guys that have that kind of off-center to center kind of a move, when they get fooled, they're always over their front foot, it seems. They're always ending up, kind of falling forward and leaning into their swings. So he doesn't have a great deal of bend in his legs that tells me that he is going to be real athletic with his lower body to start with. It's darn comfortable. We talked about this when we discussed the lower bodies in our very first discussion. It's really comfortable because there's not a lot of work there. I haven't put a lot of weight down there. Another thing that your hitter, he doesn't have a lot going on. And this is kind of a tricky one, but I look at an athlete, I look how they move, and I say, I have a pretty fair idea that this guy is not really putting a whole lot into a swing. He's getting his bat moving, but he's not really, he's not in a mode to where he's trying to do damage. Now, we use the example of, say, I like using this example because he's so smooth, was Alonso during Home Run Derby. He doesn't look like he's, throwing the house at the ball, and yet he's hitting it 500 plus. So he's swinging as hard as he possibly can, but it's a matter of how he manages that energy. What I don't see from your hitter, and what I would see if I was looking at Alonso from this side view, was I would see a very abrupt start move that continued to pick up speed, but I didn't notice it picking up speed. When I see a hitter that isn't putting a whole lot into their start, they're not jumping out of the blocks quickly, they're more picking up their speed along the line, then I'll see a guy who has more opening up of their bodies and things like that. He doesn't do that. He's pretty smooth with his swing. His intent is really low. He's in there content to hit the ball. He doesn't appear to me like he says, I'm going to let this ball get to a point where I have to go as fast as I can or else it will beat me. And then he ends up exploding on the ball, right? And I'm not seeing that out of him either. So and a lot of guys, we're again taught and trained to swing with, like controlled energy. And so you have these guys that are swinging 75% or less. And I'm like, no, that's not how you do it. What you do is you manage the duration of the energy use. But when you swing, I assure you, you want to start that bat moving with 100% of your energy to explode. And so the analogy that I use for the types of energies that I see are guys that are tight and turning their chest and all this. That's a burn. It's a fire. When I see a guy who is very, very quick to start a swing and then allows the swing to continue through and accelerate as it covers ground, then I say that hitter was an explosion. The explosion is instant, and then the burn is constant. And so you want to have them thinking more in whatever the analogy you want to use for them that they relate to, but they want to make sure that they absolutely are using 100% of everything for a very, very short period of time. Does that make sense? So if this was my hitter, some of the simple things I would do with them was I would spread him out a little bit wider so that I could bend his legs, because he's perfectly centered here. But the problem is that if he were to bend his knees now, he would start to drift backwards. His shoulders would start to lean more towards the backside, as we talked about, when you want to adjust a hitter's swing into a more athletic position. They'd have to get a little bit wider as they started adding bend to their legs. So he would be using his legs better.
Yeah, what was interesting in watching the session that evening, he handles balls up. That's what he swings at. The pitch he can handle. But if it is down, we're talking a little bit knees or thighs, he'll chop those in the ground.
Okay. Does he tend to change his posture or no?
Nope, stays the same.
Okay, that's good. Well, so then what would cause him to chop the ball into the ground if it was low? If he didn't change his posture, then he's not disrupting his eye-hand coordination. So then what in that would cause him to chop the ball on the ground? It would be his timing.
Okay.
So, he probably, I don't know, I can't speak to what's inside of his head, but he views the pitches higher in the zone. Obviously, you're going to have to hit those a little farther forward, and those lower pitches you're going to be hitting a little farther back. And so he might be a little more oriented to reaching out for balls and like that, and not so much like the ball when it gets down lower on him.
Yes, and I also, according to one of the other coaches, or maybe it was his dad that was there, doesn't swing at the pitch on the outer half of the plate. Like, he literally can't. He'll just take it because it doesn't allow him to do it in games. Like in practice swinging, probably okay, but I know they're saying in games.
It's pretty interesting. It's odd that, and again, I'd have to get to know him at that point, because that doesn't make a lot of sense. You have so much space on the outside. The closer the ball gets to you, the less space, the more in front of you have to start creating space. Whereas out here, there's all kinds of space to work. So that's very interesting. Maybe maybe he's tied the fact that he doesn't let that outside pitch get deep enough to it coming off the end of his bat, or, him having miserable results with it because of that. So therefore, he just doesn't bother swinging at it. That's a possibility, because again, maybe he doesn't have any idea about the contact points, because the swing, as I've illustrated, can take the exact same path and hit every pitch in the zone. It'll have a different vertical bat angle, but your barrel will sweep through and hit all of those. So if you work with him with some outside work, start off with some of that soft toss that's at his belt, that sort of thing, to where he's actually hitting a pitch that is on the outside of the plate and then he's driving it to the opposite field, then he'll start to correlate that, oh, I see, pitches that are out there are met back here. You can even set it on a tee if you wanted to, and say, okay, well, who cares? You can eyeball it and set the tee exactly the right place and say, who cares if you don't hit it, but go ahead and take a swing at it. And then he hits it and he's able to drive a line drive off of it. Then he'll again say, I can hit it. But right now he just thinks he can't, and therefore he doesn't. Won't bother swinging at it.
Right.
Okay, cool.
Thanks.
You bet. So I think unless Garrett wanted to add more videos, I think we're done, and that way you guys can again get some rest early, and I have an easier editing job of only doing 2 hours worth of editing tonight, so that'll be fun. Do we have any recommendations for next week's meeting?
Well, I know I brought up before, excuse me, guys, showing them, like we talked about, how to really pull the ball correctly. That's a thing that is not taught.
Yeah. That's a fairly short one. Do you guys, is everybody, give me a thumbs up if you want to hear that right now, or I can save it to another one, but I can go over that really fast. And I can explain why it's so hard. Okay, great. I can explain why it's so difficult to hit the inside pitch like that, because our eye-hand coordination is telling us that we're going to miss the ball when we're hitting the ball properly, when we're pulling properly. And I talked about in my Ted Williams discussion and showed video of Ted Williams swinging and how he isn't really swinging up. He swings incredibly flat, and then as his bat ascends, that's when he starts to catch the ball. Same thing when I showed the Hank Aaron swing last week, where he's swinging down and his barrel starts to come back up. What Griffey Jr. has done all of his, thank you, Jim. What Griffey Jr. has done had done his entire career was very much a drive down and come back up lift guy, which he didn't have a lot the same problems that everybody else has with the shift today. He was shifted on frequently and didn't care because he wasn't looking to hit the ball on the inside or rather he wasn't looking to hit the ball on the ground. He wasn't looking for pitches or how to swing and be able to put the ball on the ground. He was catching the ball much farther out in front while his barrel was lifting. So if we're catching the ball when the barrel is lifting, if we're coming at it from, let's say, the down back up or the very flat to up angle, then my eye-hand coordination says that go about a foot up in front of me. It says if I swung here, my eye-hand coordination says you're going to miss this ball because it has to be practiced to understand that it's going to return back up. And so what we do is we get to this point here and we see we're about to take our hands to a path below the ball and we chicken wing and hook the ball and let it end up hitting it to short and third. This is why pull hitting became demonized, because so many hitters did that, weren't taught how to pull the ball correctly, and they were wearing the ball out to short in the 5-6 hole. And shortstop's the best guy on the field, and so you're going to get out. When I have a hitter that hits a ball on a line to left field, a right-handed hitter, they get a double. I will always say to them, nice shot, but you know what you did wrong. And that is, that ball shouldn't be, if I'm pulling a ball, it shouldn't be on a line. Because if it is, I circled around that ball and stayed flat and brought my barrel to it here, as opposed to coming back up to the ball. And so it's just really takes some practice. In the batting cage is a great place for that because, again, there's no consequences in the batting cage. And so I can take this swing where I'm going to go, I don't care if I miss it, and wham, and then my barrel comes back up and hits the ball. And so once I make that association, just like we were talking about with that outside pitch in your hitter, once I make the association that I can do it, then I can repeat it. And it's just like timing. It's once I have timed down a pitch at 95 miles an hour and hit it, then I know I can and I know when to hit it because I have a reference. And so that success is that positive feedback. I swung down, I saw my hands missing the ball, but I allowed it to come back on its own. I did that eyes closed stuff that I talked to you about, all of you, the eyes closed drills. That guy particularly, I would have him closing his eyes. And because the inside pitch is meant further forward, it takes a little bit more time. His eyes were really closed. It was really noticeable. And he'd swing below because he would just say, time it, go. Then he would let go and his barrel would come back and hit the ball and he'd drive it on a sharp up angle. So that's the trick to pulling the ball, is actually allowing your hands to, or your brain to say, I'm going to miss this, and not listening to it. And that's what I think is not taught. And so I constantly am seeing hitters that may accidentally pull balls correctly, or more often than not, I see them rolling that ball, and then you end up with a lot of guys that are hitting into the shift that way. So does that help any? Perfect. Yeah. It's just, you just have to put them in a position to where failure has zero consequences. It's just practice. And then they do it and they go, oh, wow, that felt awesome. It was, I wasn't trying to make it happen. It happened anyways. And therefore I can now carry that into my games and say, when I see an inside pitch, I'm swinging below that ball and my barrel comes back. Thank you, Matt. My barrel's going to come back and hit that ball for me. So, all right, they're dropping off like flies, and I think we've covered everything. And again, I'm going to have this posted online tomorrow at some point, so you'll have that all as a reference. Anybody who wants any of the printed versions of the separation drill, 1, 2, 3, 4 drill, or the wall drill, send me your email in a DM and I will send that out to you, and then you'll have it on the video to have a visual reference of those drills. So thank you guys very, very much, and I will see you all next week, and I'll come up with something. Maybe Garrett and I will talk via DM during the week, and we can figure out another cool, he always gives me great ideas, so another cool idea for a discussion next week. Next week will actually have to be on Wednesday, though. Does that ruin things? Okay, good, because Stacy is going to be in Washington with her daughter for half a week, and so I pick her up at the airport on Thursday, so that would make it possible for us. Thank you, Gabe. Great to see you. And Garrett, again, I can't wait till you and I get to catch up again on our one-on-one, and good luck. I hope tryouts are going well for you. They've been going well for everybody else, and I will talk with you all again next week. Thanks.